What is up, everyone? It's Saturday. It's Saturday. BRAP is live. Quick BRAP rant. Yeah, I was actually gonna do this at 9 o'clock, but then I'm gonna watch a movie with the wife, so doing this at 8 o'clock instead. So, but thank you everyone for joining us. Kind of very impromptu BRAP rant. I know I mentioned on Wednesday. By the way, if you didn't catch Wednesday's show, definitely check it out. Great show Wednesday. Yeah, we had OBM on, One Bad Mother. We had him on, and yeah, it was just a great show. I mean, a lot of discussion around Call of Duty being multi-plat, and what that means for Microsoft and so forth, and unfortunately, some of the reaction by, I don't know, some of the Xbox fans. These are the diehards, by the way. Not every Xbox fan thinks like this, or not everyone who primarily plays on the Xbox console thinks like this. But people were upset, feeling like somehow Microsoft slighted them, which is crazy. Doesn't even make any sense to me. But anyhow, so it is what it is. I mean, yeah. So, So we're going to have Game Logic on here in just a moment. He should be joining here the next couple of minutes or so to talk about okay, so if you're not following me on Twitter, you probably should. My Twitter handle is at BRAP_podcast. So definitely give me a follow there on Twitter if you're not doing so already. But on Twitter, I put out some tweets about, and it all started really actually from a flyer. Somebody had posted a flyer for KB stores, and for some of us that are older, probably, if I would say if you're in your maybe mid to late 30s, 40s and beyond, you remember KB's toy stores. KB toy stores were primarily in shopping malls. Do malls even exist, by the way? Still, is that still a thing? I haven't been to a mall in years, probably like 8 years at least. It's been a while. I just don't have the need to go to a mall, really. Actually, that's not true. It hasn't been that long. It's been about 2 years since I've been to the mall, since right before the pandemic. So I lied. I said 8 years, but actually it's been 2 years. So, but I really don't go to the mall that much. That's just not something that I do. But anyhow, I posted this thing about KB toy stores. That we posted an advertisement, and it showed prices for games in 1990s. Shoot. Was it 96 or 95? I don't remember. Maybe it was longer than that. It was during the Sega Genesis era. Anyhow, and there were games for $50, and I said, hey, we paid $50 in 1990. Whatever it was is like $126 today. So people ran with that and were kind of upset. So, but anyhow, we got Game Logic in the house. What's up, Game Logic?
Hey, Brad, man, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine, man. Actually, can you turn up your mic just a little bit?
It's all the way up, man.
Oh, is it? Okay. It could be me. Maybe I might not have my headset turned up enough either, so it could be a me problem. But yeah, man, great to have you back on, man. To talk about of course I had to put the sizzle in the title. Sony charging $70 for PS5 games is agreed, but it's not just Sony that's doing this. Activision, EA, some other publishers are doing this as well. So we're going to talk about that because again, it's something that came up as a result of that tweet that I posted about the ad from KB Toy Stores, and people thought I was defending $70 price points, and I had discussions with people saying, well, why are they charging that much money? There's record revenue. So we're going to talk a little bit about that kind of stuff today, because it's never as simple as greedy. Obviously, do companies want to make money? Absolutely. That's what they're in the business to do. Every company's in the business to make money. Unless you maybe work for a nonprofit, but even then, nonprofit organizations get their money from donations, grants, things like that. So they're kind of about the money too, and around about whatever in a different way. So we're going to talk about that because there's definitely layers to this conversation. It's not just greedy developers or greedy Sony or greedy EA, greedy Activision. It's a little more nuanced than that, I think, and so that's why I have Game Logic here today. But Game Logic, I just want to say, man, thank you for kind of pushing me over the ledge there with regard to the PC. For those who don't know, I finally bit the bullet and bought a new PC. I did a custom pre-built, and it's not going to ship out for about 2 or 3 weeks, I think. So I may not have this thing till like maybe the 28th at the earliest, but probably not till like March 1st, 2nd, or 3rd, I think. So, but I'm excited, Game Logic. I'm certainly excited to be dipping my toes into the 3000 series GPUs, man. And I went Intel this time, which is kind of interesting because haven't been on an Intel platform or haven't had an Intel CPU in a very long time. I've really the last decade, or well, probably not the last decade, but I primarily been doing AMD builds for CPU. So anyhow, but great to have you on again, Game Logic. Thank you, man.
Thanks a lot, man. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, Game Logic, have you seen, I know this kind of is an official topic. Have you seen read anything about the controversy regarding the game Martha is Dead? Have you read anything about that?
Oh, no, I certainly haven't. Sorry.
Yeah, so Sony is, hold on a sec here. Sony is actually had the developer, so there's some scenes in this game that are pretty graphic. There's a scene where like the protagonist is cutting off, I think it's the protagonist, but cutting off the face of a dead person and then using it as a mask, and then removing a dead fetus from a dead body, right? Slitting their wrist. So these are things that are happening in the game, and Sony has asked them to remove those things from the PlayStation version of that game. On the PC and Xbox side, game is not being censored in that regard. I think it's kind of interesting. I mean, obviously, this game would be rated mature. But I think about the brutality in the games like The Last of Us, right? Or Until Dawn. I'm kind of left scratching my head here a little bit with Sony on this one. I think, I don't know. I just feel like they shouldn't do this. They shouldn't. They should leave. I think these are one of those things where I feel like just leave it up to the consumer if they want to, see this. If it bothers Sony that much, maybe put some kind of disclaimer, right?
I don't know, man. We've had these things before, Nintendo has done this before. Apple does this all the time with their App Store. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know that I disagree with the right of the platform holder to determine what kind of content they want on their platform, and even though I feel like we might look outside and like not agree with them, unfortunately, I defer to this side of the argument that a lot of people make about people like us who comment on things and say, we're not inside that boardroom, right? We're not inside making those decisions and seeing, what comparisons they make and what the yardstick is. I feel like, the difference with some of the games you highlighted is there's a difference between, combat oriented violence, in a contested manner versus, just straight up murder or kind of realistic horror. So, I mean, I don't know. It's always a tough call, obviously.
Yeah, and I don't disagree. Obviously, the platform holder has the right to decide what they want or what kind of content they want on their platform, right? But I also think that I don't know. I just had this thing with I don't believe in censorship per se. In some instances, yes. I mean, like I think there's certain things that probably could go a little bit too far. I'm not so sure this is it, but it's an interesting conversation. I mean, it's definitely something that's going around right now. And I wonder if Microsoft will do anything, or they'll stand pat and just say, you know what, just release the game on our platform. We're okay with it. Who knows? I don't know. It's going to be interesting though, to see how this kind of plays out. But
it's a tough one. we might be better on our financial topic because I have some not extreme. I have some opinions on what censorship actually is, and And like I don't necessarily feel like, you know, yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Some differences on my feelings on what censorship really is.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about $70 games, Game Logic, because this topic again came about out of a tweet that I made where people were upset, and like, you know, there was people were saying I was defending corporations, and that's not really that's not the point. Like, I don't begrudge anyone who doesn't want to pay $70 for a video game. Like, that's absolutely your right as a consumer. If you don't see value in it, have at it. Like, don't buy it. If you know, just like any other consumer product, you don't want it, don't buy it. You know, I just spent quite a bit on a pre-built, you know, custom pre-built PC, and that's not for everyone either, right? Some people would be like, yeah, F that. I'm not spending that money, right? Some people buy, you know, some people go out and buy, you know, $60,000, $70,000 Dodge Chargers, and that's just not me, right? I would never spend that much on that car, but people see value in that, right? So they're going to go out and do it. Gaming's no different. But again, I don't begrudge anyone who doesn't want to spend $70. I also don't believe in the notion of a $10 tax, as people have called the $70 price increase, especially from Sony. They've parlayed that to a tax, like it's not a tax, but anyhow. So a lot of the conversation, because of I was making comments at technically, what's up, Blades? PCMR, geez. A lot of the conversation that was happening with the KB article, the KB Toys advertisement that I tweeted out that had games listed at $50, where I said, wow, we paid $120 something for games back then. For if you take $50 and 50's worth 120 in today's dollar, right? So inflation, right? So and then I was saying, well, you know, at the start of last generation, when you adjust for inflation, we were and when the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 launched, we were paying the equivalent of $72 today for video games in 2013 when those consoles launched. So technically, we're paying $2 less today, right? When you adjust for inflation. So, but then people started saying, well, these companies are making record revenues, and that went down a whole nother rabbit hole. And I try not to talk about a company's financials because I'm not a financial analyst, number one. I'm not a Wall Street investor, number two. I kind of understand how that works a little bit, but I'm not going to peel back the onion and get into what those numbers actually really mean, because that's just not my level of expertise. But I'm amazed by how many financial analysts we have on Twitter, though. I say that jokingly, but it's kind of true. So anyhow, so that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. That is this greed, or is it a little bit more, or are they more layers to this? And they are more layers to this. As we talk about game development. So Game Logic, you're probably the perfect guest to have on too, because you've been gaming a very long time, as have I. And you and I both know that we paid for many, many years $50 for a game, right? Even 60, 70 at times. I think Street Fighter 3 Alpha or 2? I forget. One of those Street Fighter games was like $70 in like the mid 90s, I think. Do you remember that Game Logic?
Well, and you had the old games. I mean, I tended not to play them, but I mean, even if you go back to like console generation 2, I want to say, like, so I had a Magnavox Odyssey 2, and the Magnavox Odyssey had this series of games called I can't remember what they were called, like the Strategic Commander or the Strategy series or whatever. And the games came with like a a fold-out game board and coin game pieces and these plastic tops that went on top of them. And you paid, I don't remember what the list price was, but I do remember that they cost more than like whatever, you know, the rest of the library cost for the game. And then you go 2 generations forward, and you had, many of the games that like came with their own additional ROM or storage cache on the cartridge itself because the game was so big or the game needed so much memory. So, we have had instances in the past where, it wasn't a collector's edition of a game that came with extra stuff. It was just the game itself just happened to be significantly larger than other titles in the in that console's library, and so they charge more for them.
Yeah, and even then, like my experience, like with paying for games was like they were always like, I think they were always like $50, right? And I forget how much we paid for consoles back then, but $50 was a lot of money in mid '80s, early '80s, mid '80s, and whatnot. But so, but the thing that about those games too, Game Logic, is that like I think the first Metroid on the NES was, I think it was like a 7-hour game, right? Cost $50. Okay, think about that, 7 hours, and we were paying about, in today's dollar, $100 and something for that game, what's equivalent to 100 and like probably, I don't know, probably $115 or whatever, right? For that game back in 1989 or whatever it released, I forget. And that was only 7 hours of content. So think about that for a second. Like, so, and I bring that up because I think that's important. When you think about AAA games, $70 games, a lot of these games now have well north of 7 hours, right? There's some games like Dying Light 2 just came out, and it's got like 500 hours of gameplay. Like that's crazy.
Right. So you ready to start debunking?
Yeah. Why is there stuff going on in the chat right now we need to debunk?
Well, there's comments in the chat, and they're not radically, like they're not flat earther comments yet. They're just some of the topics that we've been going over this week. But the first one that comes to mind is what you just mentioned. When people draw lines back to that era of games, and they go, oh, like the article we read today, like, oh, remember when we used to pay a quarter for video games, in the arcade? And I think what a lot of people today don't realize, I think that there's this, revisionist history and, backwards altruism that has this sense that video games until the 21st century were, this, altruistic group of artists, working out of a garage, smoking cigarettes, 2 and 3 man shops making video games. And, you go back into the history, right, and you read about, I think you and I were talking about, I was reading about Tempest, right, and how Tempest became a video game. And you read about how there were restrictions at the company around the fact that there was a metric that that the design of a game was supposed to be oriented so that a quarter would last the average player 2 minutes of gameplay. Like, that was a corporate edict, right? And your bonuses and your salary were impacted by developing and designing games that didn't meet that rubric, right? So, it's kind of like a quote I read a few weeks ago, by Henry Ford that said, auto racing, racing started the 5 minutes after the second car was built. Like, the 5 minutes after the second video game was made by a company that wasn't Atari, right? Like, gaming was a business, right? And it's had metrics around it, and it's had profitability, and it's had requirements for revenue generation and metrics that it's supposed to hit. So I don't think, nothing today is new. It is all simply an evolution of what the industry has been since its very inception.
That's a great point. That's actually a great point, Game Logic. I mean, and there have been some, I guess, like tweaks, I think, to like revenue models, right? Or different revenue streams. Like, we didn't have microtransactions, back in 1990, obviously. We didn't have that, right? We didn't have DLC. We actually have more options today, too. That's the other thing, right? We have more options today than we ever did. Like, there wasn't like $10 games back in unless you got into the bargain bin. But I didn't really see many bargain bins. At least I don't recall seeing many bargain bins back then. But we had more options today than we've ever had in terms
Absolutely.
of
And I think what a lot of I feel like the opinion expressed by a lot of people, like there's a lack of acknowledgement of how we got here. I feel like, you know, people, rant and rave about the microtransactions, which again, I always stand on this platform, like be an adult, like you don't have to buy the microtransactions. Nobody's pointing a gun to your head saying, buy these skins and that skin, right? Like, and then the article we read today was like, games are more expensive today because of the microtransactions. Like the microtransactions don't make the game more expensive. Like most microtransactions are heavily oriented around games that are free to play. Yes, they do come with some games that you pay for, but again, you can be an adult. You don't have to have it. They don't increase the cost of a game to a singular consumer unless that consumer makes the choice. But like we got here again because of an evolution. We partially got, so first of all, we've always had expansion packs, right? For a very long time, there was always the model of the game came out, and then X number of months later, something came out that was $20 or $30. It wasn't called DLC because you couldn't download it back then, right? You had to go to the store and buy it. And then there became a point where expansion packs and follow-on content were kind of expected if a game was to be considered successful. Games were kind of regarded as something less than if they didn't have a follow-on expansion pack. Then we talk about MMOs, right? MMOs charged a flat subscription fee per month, right, for you to participate in the game. One of the reasons I never played MMOs was because I was like, I don't think I can fit it in my game time management schema, right, to feel obligated that I have to play X hours of the same specific game every month in order to feel like I get my ROI out of that subscription. And even MMO players started railing and pushing back against subscription fees, right? So now you get a Destiny 2 model that is an MMO that doesn't charge a monthly subscription fee, right?
Can I interrupt real quick?
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
You mentioned that like people didn't like that subscription model, right, for MMOs, right? So what happened? The market kind of corrected what the developers are doing, right?
Right.
And then they kind of pivot, and then we get something like Destiny, that free-to-play model where now it's like microtransactions. You're paying for new content. Witch Queen comes out, that's like I think $40 or whatever, right? So, and I think it's a great point. Like you talk about like how it used to be pay, the subscription, right, for an MMO. That's changed. And I always say this to people: if the market will reject or accept these things, right?
Right.
And so right now it's accepting the $70 games. But I'm sorry, go ahead, man. I just thought that was an interesting point about. So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Right on, man. And then you talk about people kind of complain about season passes, battle passes, and microtransactions, and I'm like, okay, remember that we all complained about map packs, right? You'd pay $60 for Call of Duty, and then every 2 or 3 months thereafter, a map pack would come out. You would pay $15 for that, and then some of your friends would buy them, and some of them wouldn't, and you'd all be sitting on Xbox Live, and spin the roulette wheel, get matchmaking done, and then you all get popped into a match that requires a map out of the map pack, right? Well, your little friend, Downtown Bobby didn't buy the map pack, so now Downtown Bobby's got to either sit the match out or go play with other friends and play in a rando match, right? And wait till you all get back, or that happens a certain number of times per night, right? And then at a certain point, everybody who's got the map pack says, "Hey, man, really fun playing with you, but we really want to get our ROI out of the map pack that we paid for, so we'll play with you tomorrow." Right? There was a complaint that we bifurcated the community, and people pushed back against that, and so we got season passes and battle pass. Like the things that we get today are not some wackadoodle thing that some guy fell off a horse and came up with on his own. They're here because partially, right? Because people push back against old models. right? And then one of the comments in the chat was, sorry,
Boy,
I gotta
Final
scroll
Fantasy
back up.
14 is subscription based. So we just still do have subscription MMOs, by the
Yeah,
way. I'm sorry. Go
but
ahead.
but I go back to what you said. We have options. We have different
Yes.
models,
Yes,
right?
we do. Yeah.
And that's a big part of it. Some people have complained about, well, it's all these different forms of monetization. I mean, the different forms of monetization are there for people to have choice, right? I mean, we can go back to only having two forms of monetization or three forms of monetization, and then people won't have choice, and then you'll just, you know, eat your, sawdust, right, and be happy about it. But one of the comments made earlier was that, crap. Yeah, that video game. Sorry, Zabot, and I'm not calling you out specifically, but this is because this is an opinion that I've heard echoed. Video game platform holders make more now than in the past because they're selling to more people. Yep, got it. Sort of, kind of. We can come back to that before, but again, let's talk about the rising costs of game production. And again, this is one of these theories where there are people out there who believe that this is some global conspiracy that isn't true. Um,
And I was Game Logic. I don't mean to interrupt, but before we get to that point, I want people to kind of let this like marinate as we talk about this a little bit. So I want to go back to the Atari 2600, which is the console, the first console that I owned. Well, my parents owned it. My dad owned it. My dad's the one that got me to video games. But just so you guys know how expensive gaming's always been an expensive hobby. But like Game Logic just said though, while it's still an expensive hobby, it's a hobby we have so many more choices now. Like we didn't have, again, there wasn't $10, $15 games. They just didn't exist. They weren't free to play games. Just didn't exist. You either, paid, $40, $50 for a game, or you weren't playing a game at all. That was it. You had no options. We have so many more options today. But go back to the Atari 2600. That console in 1977 launched at $200. The cost of that console in $2020 is $853. It's probably more now because we're in 2022. The average cost of video games in 1977 were $40. In 2020, that $40 is now $170. This is one of my favorite. The Intellivision. What a great I did like the Intellivision. Had friends that had that. But remember the dial pads with the numbers on it. That console launched 1979, $229. In 2020, that console's in $2020. That's $1,068. Same average cost of a game in 1979 was $40. In $2020, that's $142. I'm gonna move up here a little bit. I'm gonna go to I'm gonna skip ColecoVision. Go to Nintendo. The Nintendo 1985 launched at $179. In $2020, that's $432. The average cost of a game in 1985 was $45. That cost in 2020 is $108. Okay. Remember, guys, in 2020 we were paying $60 for games, and the NES era we were paying more for games, significantly more. Let's go to because people will always one of the things that people were pushing back on when I was talking about these prices. Game Logic was cartridges were more expensive. So let's go to I just saw the Neo Geo on this list. We're not going to talk about the Neo Geo, very expensive platform. Did you own a Neo Geo, by the way, Game Logic?
I did not. I owned it. I did own a Jaguar 64 for a time.
Okay. Speaking of Tempest, right? Because I think that was on the Jaguar. All right. So we're people always push back. They always say BRAP cartridges are more money. Okay. Now we go to disc. This is the CD era. The PlayStation 1 console launched at $300 in 1995. And 2020 US dollars, that's the equivalent to $509, right? Which is roughly what we're paying right now for the new consoles, depending on which version you get. The average game cost in 1999 was $50. That $50 is, and $2020 is equivalent to $84.85. All right. I'm going to go to the Dreamcast. The Dreamcast launched at $200 and $2020 is $310, equivalent to $310. Average cost of game was $50. That's equivalent to $77.62 in 2020. PlayStation 2 games, same thing. In 2000, average cost of game was $49.99. That's equivalent to $75.09 in 2020. The original Xbox in 2001, the games were averaging the average game cost was $49.99. That is equivalent to $73.06 in 2020. All right, so the Xbox 360, where we saw the increase of games in 2005 to $60, which wasn't popular back then because people were used to paying $50. 2005, we see a price increase, $60. So 2005, $60 was the equivalent of $79.46 in 2020. I'm going to go to last generation. I'm sorry, Game Logic. I know I interrupted, but last comparison here. All right. So, and actually, at the start of last generation, 2013, we do see, and again, we paid $60 was the average cost of games in 2013, and that's the equivalent to $66.61 in 2020, which is, when the new consoles basically launch, right? So $4 increase. All right. So that I just wanted to share that, kind of let that marinate in everyone's mind right now as we talk about the price of gaming and everything else. So I'm sorry, go ahead, Game Logic.
No, man, those are all good points. I think my only where I was gonna drop off was the comment that was made about platform holders make more money now than in the past. I'm like, again, we have to think about. I go back to this topic of rising production costs. And like I was saying, some people feel it's a global conspiracy that's not true, and it comes across in the same bucket as again, flat earthers. We never made it to the moon. There were 2 people on the grassy knoll, and Sandy Hook never happened. Like it's incredibly simple math, right? Just look at the size of development teams, which is a well advertised metric. It's no secret, right, that development team sizes have ballooned, and some development teams now are massive, right? In the 16 years since this topic really, pertinently pertains to, right, in terms of what we were paying, the $60 bump in 2005 up until now. Like when a team is 300 people, 500 people, it's sometimes, for Bungie, even larger for maintaining Destiny 2. And you simply multiply that times the ever-increasing salaries, right, that technical professionals are being paid. And the ever-increasing salaries that the top 10% of technical professionals are being paid. Again, we talked a few weeks ago about kind of how salaries and income work in technical fields. And again, I've never gone to a job for a pay cut as an engineer.
No one does. No one should.
Right.
No one should.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Every time, right? In the gaming, the gaming community is highly migratory. You have contract labor, and I think that's a big part of the formula that I think some people base some conceptions around, and there needs to be an understanding that contract labor is not the same as permanent employees. But the top 10% echelon of those engineers, the people that for games production, you really need to come across the line and really get to release, like these sharpshooters that go around from company to company, because they are literally those guys. Those guys basically, they call their shot, right? As far as what their salaries go, and again, those are always going up. And typically, the way things work in technical fields and in a business cycle, the technical salaries go up before pricing out the door really catches up to that cycle, right? So I'm running a project. I set a budget. I have 2 or 3 engineers leave. The 2 or 3 engineers that replace them will typically be more expensive. My ability to reset prices and charge more money for the services that I'm providing typically lags behind that, right? By, I would say, at least 6 months or more. So it shouldn't be any rocket science that that you take salary X times 80 people, and then you take salary X, right, plus one or however many years or whatever, and multiply it times 300 or 500 people, and you obviously see that production costs are increasing. And that's before I even get into the cost of, associated services and licensing and tools, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's not funny, but it's great. So you talk about talent, and one thing people don't probably think about as it relates to talent, human capital, like it's expensive, right? And when you start getting into specialized fields, and I only know this because this is what I do in my professional life. When you start getting to really specialized fields, and I did recruit. I've recruited for, IT software developer roles. I've recruited for those positions in the past. And it's like, Game Logic, those folks, the ones that are really good, they pretty much kind of command their own destiny. Like they
Right.
can kind of pretty much name their price and pretty much pick where they want to go. And if you don't want to pay to play, they're going to go somewhere else. I mean, I especially, it's interesting in the area I live in. We have, the federal government here. And so when you start getting into even tech roles where you require clearances, those are very specific, specialized skill sets that cost money, right? And that are in high demand. And those people would really, literally say, you know what, this is what I want. If you can't meet it, there's no point of us having a conversation.
Right, because they know that the next company is going to come along and pay it.
Yeah.
I think one of the things in the chat that's going on is maybe a little off kilter. So Jago6 is asking, I think Jago asked one question and maybe your response might be a different response or he's interpreting it differently. Jago, I think what BRAP answered was how much money they need to make back versus the number of units they need to sell. There we go.
What was the?
So I think he was asking how many units does a game need to sell, and I'm not sure if you answered how much money does it need to make.
No, I know Phil Spencer.
Maybe you said billion instead of million.
I meant million. I just corrected that. Phil Spencer a while ago said that games today, AAA games, have to, and Game Logic, you remember this. Remember, if a game many years ago sold 1 million copies, it was a success, right? It says
right.
a AAA game selling 1 million copies now is dead in the water. Like it's a loss, right? Phil Spencer said AAA games need to sell at least 45 million to break even.
Right.
That's just to break even.
And I went back a few weeks ago and did this math just based on simply labor costs and came up with, at best, like a AAA game that is somehow pulled off by a relatively small team has to at least sell 2 million. Your average AAA game, my calculations were right, kind of in that ballpark, with needing to sell 4 to 6, and you really need to be at 8 to really be turning a profit, right? And so, and again, we go back to another figure that we pulled up, right, which is that we kind of talk about, again, revenue. Revenue is a thing that is only generated by the sale of goods sold, right? It does not take into account necessarily cost of goods sold. That's a margin discussion, and so it doesn't take into account the cost of games. It also doesn't take into account the fact that only about 5% of the games that come out are actually profitable. There are, what was the number that we saw? There are 12,000 games released on Steam last year, nearly 12,000.
12,000 games,
and that's just PC.
That's just
right.
PC,
And so I think what we don't understand is, again, people talk about, even when they talk about profit margins, right? And they talk about how,
well, they always bring up record, like, so the pushback to this argument or this conversation about increasing in cost of $70 games is that these companies are making record revenues, right? But it's not as simple as just saying that, because there's more behind that number, right? Which I think is what you're getting into, I think, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Right. I mean, the margins that you have to make have to be higher when you have an incredibly risk-prone business, and a 5% success rate is a ridiculously risk-prone proposition, right? That means literally 95% of the things that you're going to greenlight are going to be commercial failures, right? And when you have a board and you have stockholders, right? That's a problematic thing. Again, I point back to the comment I made last week, right, about the Sony platform, where somebody had said, oh, will these games, Sony games sell to so many people? It seems like a lot of people are interested in them, but The Last of Us, Uncharted, Ratchet and Clank, all of these premier properties for Sony, they sell to, somewhere upwards and close to, say, 20 million people, right? That's 1/7, a little less than 15% of their total install base. And I can definitely tell you that in a boardroom, right, while that may be pretty successful from a gamer's perspective, right, there's the little guy in the room with the tie on who's saying, we need to do better than that, right? You mean to tell me that all of this money that we invested in that title and all the time we gave that development team resulted in us selling to 1/7 of our install base, and will not see that as successful? And that right there is like about as good as it gets in the industry, right? And you're still walking into a commercial environment where there's an ask for you to still do more.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And people, it's funny, like people don't realize. I think it was Matt Piscatello who told me like industry standard in terms of like if you have a first party game, and you, because I had this conversation with him like 2 years ago because I was trying to ask him like, because I was telling him, I was like, people are saying that like I don't know, like I think it was like maybe God of War or something, like, oh, it only sold X amount of copies and it sold to like 7% of the install base. And he said something to the fact like if you sell 5 to 7% of the install base, that's actually pretty good by industry standards. So I was like, okay, I mean, I'll take his word for it. The guy works for MPD. I don't know. But what Sony and Nintendo are doing from our perspective, right, is just, just phenomenal. I mean, Mario Kart 30 plus million or whatever it is. And now God of War 20 million, Horizon Zero Dawn, another 20 million. And Ryan Landers just brought up a great point. The other thing too is not all those 20 millions are games at full price, which I think you kind of brought up an interesting point in my conversation with you, Game Logic, that buying the game at $20, and I think John Garvin, who was the writer and one of the leads on Days Gone, said like buy the game at full retail, like that's how you really help the developer, right? Not buying it at like $20 or whatever the case is.
Right, right.
And I think you had mentioned that too, like you brought that point up.
Well, my metaphor was because again, I mean, you and I both work in technical fields. I do, my job involves a lot of, hiring, making the call on hiring for my teams and what staffing levels we get to, and that's something that I have to balance against profitability versus schedule and yada, yada, yada. But, the topic was, and I hire, I've unfortunately, maybe spent a lot of my career hiring, making decisions on hiring test personnel. And, one of my things that I said was, the QA people, like the test engineers, particularly the guys who are going to be doing the automation, right? I don't, and I'm not in the game industry, but my analogy is like, I don't hire those people for the trailing sales, right? I don't staff up tons of engineers for the people who are going to buy my game at bargain bin prices, right, at $30, right, or less, because that's not really necessarily what pays that person's salary, right? What comes into the calculation, right, is my projections on how much that game is going to sell at full price. And so a longer that the game is on the market, and this gets into things like depreciation and amortization of capital expenses and R&D expenses, right? Those things don't necessarily help, right, on depreciation. And depreciation determines when I can get expenses off of my balance sheet and determines how I look in terms of financial health to Wall Street. And so, when I have a certain amount of time to depreciate the upfront capital investment that I make in building a title, and that's going to go into my formula of how I'm going to staff. Again, I'm not going to staff QA people and testers for people who are going to buy my games at half price, right? So, it makes a difference, when we buy games and how we support games, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, no, and I also somebody it just kind of deviate here from what you just mentioned, but some of the live chats. This is why we have subscription models, or this is why subscription models are taken over. Residual income 24/7. Nintendo's bestsellers can't outdo that. Do you think Game Logic that's kind of a result, subscription service, a result of these increased costs and the risk associated with game development?
Yeah, I mean it de-risks your forward-looking formula, right? When you have, I mean, and cash flow has always been a thing that has been more attractive to Wall Street, right? Than again, mounting up this ginormous effort, right? Requiring, hundreds of millions of dollars of upfront investment with a 95%, risk chance that it's not going to mean anything. And so yeah, actually having some, in the development model makes a difference in the calculation of that risk. I hate to say it, but when you look at a game like Rainbow Six Siege, and you look at games even like I was about to say No One Lives Forever, but No Man's Sky, right? And so you look at these games that that companies can just, or even small development shops, like in the case with Hello Games, can knuckle down on and commit, right? And kind of grab themselves in the gut and push forward and can turn a game around, right? That all the while has large amounts of recurring revenue, happening along the way. That's a significant de-risk, right, picture for investors. And so, I mean, it shouldn't be any wonder, that those things are looking at as being desirable.
Yeah. And so, and there's actually some evidence too where putting a game after it hits that like maturation I'm sorry, I can't even talk right now. After it releases full retail at full price, there's some evidence, and we had Matt Piscatello on a while back, and he mentioned, because we're talking about Game Pass, and Game Pass was kind of the new thing, right? But he mentioned it's like there had been some data that showed that. He explains to us is a game will hit its maturation point in the retail space, and then you'll there's only so much you could squeeze, so many pennies you could squeeze out of that, right? And he goes, but going into a game like a Game Pass, there was some evidence that showed that it kind of helped increase sales of that game again, right? So I do think that's kind of the direction Sony's going, and that's a whole nother conversation with what they're working on with Spartacus.
Right, but you're talking about that bump in sales that you get when a game is about to leave Game Pass.
I don't know if it was. I don't know the timing of it. He just mentioned that there was that some games had benefited from increased sales from going into Game Pass after they had released retail.
Right.
So I don't know if it was as the game was about to leave, or if people were just buying it playing it, and then hey, I want to buy this game now, because you could buy. That's the thing no one talks about Game Pass. People call it a rental service. I'm like, first of all, it's not a rental service. You can actually buy the game. It's a big, and that's kind of Phil's always talking about. Well, we get called the Netflix, but we're not like Netflix, because unlike Netflix and Game Pass, you can actually buy the game, right, at a discount. I think it's like you could save like 25% off or something. I think the purchase of the game or whatever.
Right.
So.
And I use it a lot. I've used it a great deal after having. I think this may have actually been when I fell over and subscribed to Game Pass, was after I had a bad experience of buying a game that was broken and not getting a refund for it. And I was like, using Game Pass as a demonstration service, right, to try before I buy is an effective strategy, right? It gives me an opportunity to sample a bunch of games, and then when I see that a game isn't what I want, right, I haven't committed to buying the whole thing. So again, people will have different opinions about that, because they want to judge how I spend my money. But that's part of the reason that I keep it around.
Yeah, no, I have it for Microsoft's first party, especially now with all the stuff, all the studio acquisitions. I'm locked in for like 3 years. But it's interesting because we get a lot of is it greed, right? And you and I were talking about this offline. it's capitalism, all right, and these companies are in the business to make money. And look, I mean, whether you agree with it or not, I mean, like cost of development, and I love that you talked about human capital, the rise of the rising cost to hire people now, right? Because you're right, like when you're hiring new people, and people don't know this, like a new hire is probably making more money than your internal staff, right? Because they may have been there longer, they may, and sometimes you have to, huh?
I was gonna say it's a constant struggle. Like for me, who has I have a principle and an ethos that look, even as I bring new people in, I don't like to upset the equilibrium on my teams, because eventually people know how much everybody makes. Right.
You got to protect the internal equity of the team. Like that's
right,
and that's really like it's a balancing. Like I said, like I mentioned to you, my firm, we just did a mid-year increase because we needed to be able to compete, and we needed to protect our people. We need to protect ourselves from our people leaving, because, like you said, at some point everyone's going to know what they're making. If they're like, wait a minute, this person's making 5% more than I am. What the hell? I've been here 5 years. That's not a good thing.
Right. I don't like recruiting new people in. At the lower ranks, it's not bad, but like I don't look, even though we might have a technical need for a specific skill set, I don't like bringing in people at the middle level, making as much as like my senior people in my leads, because that's when you really get the friction. And so like I said, it's that constant balancing act to constantly seek that talent, right? Whose price is always going up. But then still, encountering challenges in like getting through given projects, and it's a thing.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah. And I love, so again, I love that you talk about that, because that's something that people don't talk about. It's always the record revenues, these companies are making all that money, and something else we see too is, well, they're selling more games now, right? So people talk about that, but I think you mentioned that, well, they're selling to more people, and but again, not everyone's paying the $60-$70 for those games day one either, right? So
right, and the costs are constantly going up to
exactly, and so not every consumer is worth it. Is I guess contributing to the pot as somebody who, or they're contributing to the pot differently, right? The people who are paying $60-$70 day one, they're contributing the most. Those that are not waiting, and that's fine. Like I'm not saying you shouldn't wait for a game to go on sale. It's your prerogative. But you contribute less to the pot in the eyes of the developer, right, or the publisher, in terms of how much money they get for that. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So just a few kind of numbers that we scratched together, right? So, the average profit of the gaming industry for the sectors that it is typically analyzed and evaluated with are in around the 50% point for gross margin, right? There are many other not many, but there are several other sectors, right? Like fintech, like banking systems, like healthcare, that make more than that 50% margin. So the amount that the gaming industry making isn't like it's so significantly unusual in comparison to other markets. Real estate is another one. And then again, people a lot of times talk about margin. There's gross margin, and that's one thing. But then the other thing to look at really is net margin, right? And to look at, for every dollar that I sell, how do I want to put this? How many dollars of that are, for every dollar of revenue I make, how many dollars of that are profit, right? Which speaks to the efficiency or the rate at which you're making money for everything that you sell. And the net margins for even some of the largest third-party publishers are like in the teens, right? Sometimes in the high teens, sometimes scraping up into the 20s. But again, those net margins are not egregiously higher, are not much higher, right? Are actually quite around the average for many, many, many industries. And so, again, there's this perception that the gaming industry is some giant amongst other industries, and it's not. The whole size of the gaming industry has not caught television yet, which is up still over 200 billion. And so I think there is a thing where the gaming industry is a juggernaut amongst other entertainment industries, particularly when you take into account that some of your typical cable TV model industry subsectors are kind of on the wane. But it is not yet today, right? At this thing that is, you know, so much bigger than some other industries. I think one of the comments that was made in the chat is about how, inflation for other product areas is slower. And one of the things I wanted to comment on tonight is, and it's one of the things I'm a little concerned about, inflation, other industries where prices are constant, right? If I wanted to draw a comparison, you look at the gaming industry, and you look at the fact that by and large, at least its core monetization model, right, the sale of a single unit of a game has remained static for 16 years. The only other industries where that type of thing actually occurs is in some of the things that were mentioned, right? Food, gas, right? What's the difference in those? Those are commodities. How do those things maintain those price levels? They are incredibly highly regulated, right? By the government, right?
It's a great point, man.
I don't know how in the world the gaming industry could continue to keep its costs, right, keep its sales prices the way that it is, the way that they are, unless they were to be a heavily regulated industry, which I don't think any of us want. Right?
So you real quick, you mentioned that, and you think about what I mentioned in terms of prices, right? Over the last 20 years. It has been static, more or less, right? But the price, the cost to make these games has not, right? At some point, something has to give, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So I thought that was a great point. But go ahead, man.
No, and I mean that's the part of what we're all talking about. Again, with prices having remained static, it shouldn't be any surprise that we have seen the emergence of multiple different vectors of revenue model because you have to make up the slack somewhere, right? If you're going to continue putting out that type of content.
Yeah. And so you mentioned it, like the revenue models, and I think in part two, this is why we have things like we're talking about like NFTs, right? And why the gaming, and I don't know I'm still trying to figure out what NFTs are. I mean, I have a general understanding, but like I'm curious to see how they're going to impact gaming. But what did you say though, like that this is why we have things like microtransactions, now NFTs, because the industry is looking for other ways to monetize, because like I mean if you think about it, like if they get close to $100 for AAA games, people are going to go like lose their minds, and I'm sure they're probably a little. I would imagine, and I think, and I could be wrong. My guess is that because it's been so static, maybe some of that is because of the fear of pushback by the consumer. Would you say that that might be the case?
Yeah, well, and the market's changed, right? Again, we talk about they're making record revenue and selling to so many different people. Again, let's go back to the 1980s, right? And a lot of people don't like to hear this, but I think it's the reality, right? The Atari 2600 and other game consoles that came out at that time. And look, I have full respect for how everybody makes a living. Those consoles were not made with market targeting and consumer targeting for everyone to be able to buy them. They were made for largely people in a middle class socioeconomic status, right? Because prices have remained static over time, and maybe this is part of the reason, right? Maybe part of the reason that they remain static is to shift that line, because again, they were constantly looking for ways to increase profits, right? Other stratas of socioeconomic status have been able to come into the market as gaming consumers, right? That were not there at the inception of the gaming industry, right? Again, games are luxury products. Game consoles are luxury products. The unit price of a game is, correct me if I'm wrong, as I'm sitting here thinking about it, I'm pretty sure it's the most expensive form of kind of regularly consumable entertainment that is not event type entertainment that that we have access to, right? Movies,
Yeah.
music, television, like
you're spending $500 for a console, right?
Right, and then $60.
And not just that. I mean, like you see all the people on Twitter with the, oh, I just got the OLED, I just got the the C10, right? You see those. So it's also everything else that comes with those consoles, right? People want that 120 FPS. They want variable refresh rate. You got to have a TV for that, right? Those TVs aren't cheap. You want a TV that could do 4K 120. You need that HDMI 2.1 port. Those TVs aren't cheap, right? So in some instances, it's not
expensive.
It's in some instances, it's not just the console that you're buying all these other things that complement that $500 you just spend, which would get you very well north of $1,500, $2,000 easily, right?
Right. I'd be very curious to see who here in chat has not bumped the speed of their internet plan right in the last 20 years in an effort primarily to keep up with the demands of online gaming.
That's a great point, man. I mean, like Xbox Live, I was on dial-up, and when Microsoft announced the beta program for Xbox Live, I immediately, because they said, you need to have a broadband connection, I immediately upgraded to broadband, right?
Right.
So I could have that experience. But it was an increased monthly cost for me because I was going from $56K, which was relatively cheap at the time, to broadband, which was a lot more expensive.
Right.
So
I do not subscribe to FiOS for work. Let me tell you, work would be just fine on 5 megabits per second, right? I'm not subscribing to FiOS so I can get that work assignment in, much faster.
So you can trade emails all day, right? Yeah. No, I mean, look, I have the gigabyte Comcast package because it's not for surfing the web, it's for gaming.
Right.
Because I was downloading those, and look, think about it. It's funny, like I think the same, it's interesting, the same people that are and again, like I understand, like I'm not, if you yes, Ryan Landis, I was an Xbox Live beta tester. I haven't announced that in quite some time, so thank you, Ryan, for reminding me. But I think what people forget too is that, they don't want price increases in gaming, which is really, like, I've always felt like people treat gaming like it's immune to price increases, inflation. It's immune to the consumer habits or that people have with other products. You know what I mean? Like, again, I'll go back to the whole Sony charging, I can't believe they're charging a $10 next generation tax. It's not a tax, right? It's Sony feels that these games on the PlayStation 5 compared to the PlayStation 4 version of that game is worth the additional $10. They have every right to do that, right? Obviously, the market's going to determine at the end of the day whether that is acceptable. And so far, it seems like it is. But Sony's also including. It's funny when I say this, people are like, "Oh, you're defending Sony." It's not about defending Sony. It's that they are tangible things that you're getting for that additional $10. The haptic feedback, adaptive triggers, right? On the DualSense, 3D audio, faster load times, things like that. And I know, people always compare, what Xbox is doing to what Sony's doing. And obviously, Game Logic, you and I have talked about how Sony's kind of bumbled the messaging, right? With the upgrade path. Like I don't think it's still great. That's an area where Microsoft's done much better, but Sony is giving you like tangible things that are reasons why someone might see value in those, like value in that additional $10, right? It isn't just PS5 version, extra $10, and that's it. Like you are getting things in addition to, which for me as a consumer, that extra $10 to have the 3D audio, haptic, feedback, and all that other stuff, it's worth $10 for me, right? And if it's not worth $10 for you, you can still get the PS4 version and play it on your PlayStation 5. You'll be fine. You'll enjoy it, right? But it's interesting. I just feel like gaming, people it's like the rules of consumer behavior and how business works. The people just don't feel like, it's almost like they don't, like gaming is immune to those things, and it's not. It's like any other industry, right?
Right. And we're in comments in the chat that, correlate with, our feelings, Jonas Lefevre saying, because gaming is such a luxury for most, that is why most resent an increase so much. It may push a luxury out of their budget. And I mentioned I wasn't going to get too far into my opinion on this matter on your show, Brad, but I feel that's really what it is. It's really a matter
I would agree with him. Yeah.
Yeah. Of spend that people are willing to make or are capable of making, how it might impact their lifestyle, right? And them not wanting to make that choice. And my thing is, and I'm sure this is going to get some negative comments, but again, these are comments I'm making because of economic realities, right? Of economic laws, right? And what it means to exist in a capitalist, right, financial system, right, market system. And I say these things as intellectual challenge, right? When did it become a crime? We keep saying, that's greed, that's greed, that's greed. When did it become a crime to be greedy in a capitalist society? Now, when I say greedy, I'm not talking about the person who, again, this is the analogy you and I talk about. I'm not talking about the person who in a pandemic buys all the toilet paper from Amazon and then sells it out of their garage at 5 or 6 times its price. I'm not talking about people who use bots who go around and buy up all of the Xboxes and PlayStation 5s and then scalp them at ridiculously, price gouged prices on eBay. I'm talking about the simple fact that in our economic system, if I make a good that more people want every day and the demand increases, when in the world did it become a bad thing for me to increase my price on a highly desired product? That is the way the market is supposed to work. We are not supposed to, and now that I'm kind of getting myself spooled up about this, right? We complain about microtransactions, we complain about NFTs, we complain about things like this is what we've done, right? We've put a cap on the price of games, right? We've helped enable that, right? And therefore, kind of like, when you put all of your weight on the lid of a boiling over pot, right? And that escaping gas tries to find every nook and cranny that it can get out of. That is what we're seeing in the gaming industry, right? Because people have pushed back against the notion of a price increase, the suppliers of the market have tried to find every nook and cranny that they can, every alternate path that they can to try and monetize, right? And so where we've wound up is very much a factor of our own doing, right? Like you said, at some point, it's got to give.
Something has got to give. You can't have static prices, and like this guy Colsace, I think his name is. He's saying they're making more profits than ever. These companies richer than ever. Why are they raising prices $10 extra? Why not $2 to $5? Rise in price, okay, but $10 too much. So I think I don't think he's heard. I think he just got into started watching the show, but
well, I think he raises some interesting points, and it's ones that I consider too. Why are we getting bumps? I mean, part of the reason we're getting kind of larger size bumps than we may want is because exactly like in my opinion, like if the gaming industry had been doing what it should have been doing, arguably from the beginning, we would have gotten things like a $1.29 price increase, like $2.50 price increase, like $3.50 price. But that's exactly what they haven't done. They haven't done the gradual incremental price increases that, quite frankly, when we do these things in other markets, people don't notice, right? All of a sudden, you're going to the store and you're paying more for socks.
I mean, movies.
Yeah, right.
Movies. I mean, like movies are the perfect example. Like, and that's the thing. Like it was so static for such a long time, and then they made these $10 increases, right? Increments and increases. You're right. They didn't do it like every other industry. Like with with movies. Going to the movies is vastly more expensive today than it was 20 years ago, right? And to I guess what Kolish didn't what he probably missed is when I was gaming, technically speaking, is actually cheaper now, the cost of a AAA game, than when I was on the NES or on the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, right? when you adjust for inflation. So, but yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, man. Like that, I just want to chime in about the movie thing because the movies are probably the best example of those small incremental increases.
Right, and no, I was going to add in, right, and that's the movie, right, to say nothing about the food inside the theater, right? That's where the real price increases go.
Yeah. The Coke's like what, like $10?
Yeah.
It's and then the other thing too, like people talk about, you got to talk about the Sony thing, the $10 increase, right? I'm sure a lot of the people that are complaining about the $10 thing, and that's fine if they don't see value in it, but they're also probably doing that. They're also probably partaking in that model in other areas, right? They're probably going to, you know what, you want to go see Spider-Man in the IMAX? That's going to cost you, right? It's going to cost you. You want to get,
right,
subscribe.
Exactly.
You subscribe to Netflix. You got a 4K TV. Netflix isn't giving you 4K programming for free. There's an upcharge for that, right? That's what I'm saying. They're giving you tangible things, and I see people saying, "Oh, well, Xbox, is giving, stuff. They're not charging you $10." But my argument with Xbox is one, we also don't know if they're going to stick with the $60 price model. They haven't committed to that, by the way. Anyone? They haven't come out and said, by the way, all our games are going to be $60 moving forward. I venture to say that Microsoft will charge $70 for once they start really releasing, because they haven't yet. Everything's been cross-platform, but once they move past, they really hit their stride with the series consoles, right? And everything's been released specifically for those two platforms. Don't be surprised to see Microsoft charge $70. And you may say, well, why would they do that? Well, because one, they know the market will bear it, and they're in the business of making money, like Sony, like every other for-profit organization, right? And they're going to do it. They would be fools not to, especially if the market is saying right now, as it stands, because we're seeing like Call of Duty's a $70 game. That game's selling well. Sony hasn't seen a decrease in the sales of their first-party games on PlayStation 5. People are paying $70 for those games. So the market's kind of already saying, hey, you know what? We're okay with this. We're okay with the $70, right? Because we want it. We want those products. We see value in those things. Microsoft, I think you would agree, Gamlogic. They have those data points too, right? They're probably looking at the data points and say, wait a minute, $70, why not do this? Because you think Satya's going to tell the investors, hey, guys, you know what? We want to be the good guys here. We're going to leave $10 on the table because we want to be at $60. How would that conversation go with the investors?
Right. I submit, there may be alternatives for Microsoft to follow, but again, I go back to the, pushing down on the lid of the pot that's trying to boil over, right? Even if they leave that $10 on the table there, because that's the $10 that's in plain sight and in everybody's target line, that $10 is going to eke its way out of that boiling over pot, right, in some direction or the other.
Yeah. And not to, like, I see people kind of use this as, and I'm not saying Jago is, but I know some people use this kind of as console war fodder about the 70, what Microsoft doing. Like somebody said, like Dolby Atmos video and audio support is in Xbox games. Yeah, it is. But it was their last generation too. And they're not offering the same feature sets per se, like as a DualSense, whatever. And that's fine, but I don't think we can pretend that one company isn't offering tangible feature sets. Now, whether or not you like those feature sets or want those feature sets, that's a different conversation. But I think we can all agree that you are getting different things on one platform that you're not getting on the other, and you have a decision to make. Either the things that I can only get on one platform, is that worth the extra $10 for me? If it isn't, that's fine. But if it is, that's okay too. You know what I mean? Again, I don't begrudge anyone who doesn't want to pay $70 for a game. I said that earlier, and I still say that now, because look, I don't, I'm not gonna gatekeep or pocket watch what someone else is doing. So what someone does with their money either, right?
Right.
That's not my. That's no one should, in my opinion.
Right, and all this angst, right, about, and I will say quite flatly, right, about console gaming, right, and console gaming isn't even the big percentage of the market, right?
It's not, no. Mobile.
One of the things that we have to look at from an analytical standpoint I go back to that matter of socioeconomic status, right? Why do you think the mobile gaming industry is the largest of the three subsectors right now? And it's because it's because that at its inception point, right? Because they knew what the socioeconomic model was, it presented monetization factors that did not create that barrier to entry from a consumption side, right? That console gaming did, much less PC gaming, right? And so because the cell phone industry has manufactured a way for people who are quite frankly, and again, I'm not using these as derogatory terms. I'm just trying to talk about stratification of the market. People who are not necessarily middle class still have the ability to procure a flagship phone, right? That is highly gaming capable, right? The monetization model of mobile gaming followed similar suit, and it does not create those barriers. And so you have people all up and down the socioeconomic stratification layers who can participate in mobile gaming. Therefore, hence, mobile gaming is the largest of the three subsectors of the markets within the entire gaming industry, right? The most significant, right? Consoles are smaller, and PC gaming is even smaller than that, right? So, we grouse or whatever or push back on the notion of price increases. Again, I would dare to say most console gamers probably don't want monetization models in console gaming to look like they do in the mobile industry. A lot of those mechanics and vehicles are already here. They've kind of slowly seeped over, right? But they are still not, I would contend, the majority of the models that are out there.
Yeah, I mean, mobile's like, yeah, it's free to play, but how many more add-ons do you have, right? Like, I know somebody. What's that game? Clash of.
Clash of Clans, I think.
Yeah, I know somebody who spent like $5,000 on that game.
Right, and I mean, even you simply talk about
like free to play game.
Right.
What'd you say?
I was just saying, you even just talk about like the user experience on that, right? One of the things I hate about mobile games is their tendency to constantly nag you, right? I mean, at least for the most part, I think I would contend that most console games with microtransactions tend not to nag you. Call of Duty kind of nags you when you first start the game, right? It gives you that pop-up about what's on sale in the microtransaction store that day. But once you push past that, you're pretty much done, right? And I guess until you actually achieve a level in the battle pass, and there's some things kind of on the periphery of the screen that talk, to you about, hey, you could pay to level up, your battle pass. But mobile games like do this thing of like every time you complete a level or a challenge, many of them pop up this naggy thing on the top of your screen that you can't do anything in the game until you push past it. That reminds you that, hey, if you just paid, to buy some extra coins that are on sale in the store, then you could enhance your gaming experience, right? So we're still a good, several football fields away from that type of dirtiness, right, in our windshield in games. And again,
I hope we don't get there. By the way, like that would be super.
And I was going to say the cost for not getting there might be paying $70 for a game.
That's actually a great point. Yeah,
that might be the trade-off.
Well, I mean, even when and I remember this, this goes back to the 360 days. When I remember the $60 increase, they were talking about the increased cost of development, and and because we're entering the HD era of gaming, right? So there was additional costs to that, right? Like it's interesting because I remember developers saying like, things are getting more expensive. We may need to try to figure out, or we may need to try to figure out other ways to generate revenues, right? And you talk about like the mat packs, that was kind of one way, right? I remember that. But yes, some of them went, MTX, a microtransaction model, and it worked, right? And if it works, those things are other developers are gonna take notice of that stuff, right? And if they are having issues with, their game not maybe hitting that tipping point where it's successful, they may look into those things, right? I mean, look at EA. I mean, what, $9 billion in microtransactions or something like that in revenue? If you're a big publisher and EA's doing it and you're publicly traded, again, it goes back to, I think, what you said about the investors, the guy with the suit and tie, right? He's probably saying, wait a minute, EA's doing, what are we doing here? Right?
So here's an inevitability, right? And this is still BRAP, not the grand inevitability that I'm still keeping secret for now. Right? But here's the inevitability that I feel like gamers need to acknowledge, because I think it will be helpful, right, in people kind of charting their path of how they want to behave on the market. The reality is that the luxury product nature of games means that over time, it is going to push some consumers out of the market. That is an inevitable reality. Families today, going back to your movie analogy, families today don't go to movies the same way they used to in the 70s. Right? Well, let me try and reveal how much personal information I want to share. Right? There was a point in my life, right, in my childhood, where I was not poor, right? We were kind of middle class. During that time, we didn't complain about the whole family going out to the drive-in, right? Catching fireflies in the park before the movie started, right? Then getting the big tub of popcorn and sitting in the car, right? Flash forward 10, 15 years later, 20 years later, now out of my childhood, so we won't cover my time when I was poor. Families complain about packing up all four members of the nuclear family and going to the movies at a non-matinee, right? And paying, right, for the movie and for the food, right? I make a pretty decent living. I complain about the notion of packing up my four-person family, right, and taking them to the movie. That's an expensive deal, right? What do families do today? Families more and more watch movies at home. There's more and more big movie nights. There's more and more of Netflix nights, right? Feet kicked up on the couch. Kids get home from school. You make popcorn at home, right? Everybody gets their own bag. You watch and consume a movie that way, right? Let's not mix the pandemic into it. But the point is that those families that are in certain socioeconomic stratas no longer go to the movies, right, in the same way that they would have or could have back in the 70s, right? This market is going to push some people out of it. That is a fact, right? Now, acknowledging that, I think people can, make some decisions about, what their gaming future kind of looks like and how they want to behave in the market.
Well, I think I think this is where, and I think about Game Pass, this is probably an opportunity for Microsoft maybe to be a place that doesn't necessarily push those individuals out, right? But again, at some point, even that service is going to increase in price, right? Maybe not to $70, right? But you're still going to need some kind of device to play that, which goes back to what you said earlier. Now, obviously, if you have a phone, that's a little bit different. But even then, it's like performance could be dictated. How well that service works via cloud could be based on internet connection, and which again, if you want to have a good connection, you pay for those things, right? It's just for me, it's hard it's hard for me to think that there could be some people pushed back or pushed out to Game Logic, because I don't know. I guess I've always felt like gaming was one of those last bastions of hope where it's like, everything went up in price. We always had gaming, right? And maybe that's not a realistic view anymore. With how especially because we want these, like, that's the other, we want AAA games, but we can't say we want them and not pay for them either, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Well, and when I say push people out, I think some people are going to get pushed off the AAA island. I just flat out. I think there's going to be a point where, and again, I go back to, what I will say, which will probably get me in a lot of hot water, is look, everyone's not if the costs of producing a AAA game are spiraling, right, and that's your luxury product on the luxury market, that's your top tier, right? I don't even know what car models are called now, but that's your whatever EX version of the vehicle. Like, everybody's not entitled to buy the premier version of the vehicle, right? I mean, it's, again, the cell phone market has squelched around to finding a way to sell these things, but I and I do a lot of cell phone advisement, smartphone advisement for people when they ask questions. I'm like, not everybody's entitled to buy an iPhone 13 Pro Max, right? And not everybody needs one. And I think at the end of the day, like I said, this market's going to skew around to a point where not when you go back to all the things that you just talked about, right? Which is, look, to play in Call of Duty Vanguard is a bit of a disappointment. So let me just say, in its heyday, right? I don't know that everyone's entitled to play Call of Duty, right, at the levels that experience really demands, right? To really give, I don't know that everybody's entitled to play, the newest Call of Duty at 4K, right, at 60 frames per second or higher, on a FiOS connection, right, with DualSense haptic feedback or whatever, right? Like, I think we're going to go to a time where that's going to become harder and harder and not necessarily accessible to everyone. Now, again, I think it will just change. I think gamers will still be able to access AA experiences. I'm hoping that, again, as there's a point where we saw the extinction of the middle tier of the AA game, and now it's kind of come back. It would be nice, I think, to see some stratification of pricing, accommodating that. I would be okay with a price increase for full on AAA games, right? If AA games kind of were price differentiated and more accessible to people. So, and I think there'll be other avenues. Again, we go to Microsoft, looking at rolling out, Xbox, USB sticks, right, for people to play on, and all the various mobile, mobile formats. It's kind of weird. Samsung just did their Unpacked event, and I talk a little bit about Xbox Cloud Gaming and Stadia as well. And Apple does this thing of they don't allow you to play the game. They don't allow you to play those games on Metal, right? You're streaming them, but they only allow you to play them through the browser. And I talk about how I feel like it's a narrow differential, but I feel like the games feel better on an Android tablet when it's not coming through the browser. And Samsung just released more Galaxy Tab SKUs than they ever have in the last few years. And so I wonder if there's a knock-on effect from, trying to come up with, bring Android tablets back onto the market to take advantage of a lot of the different cloud gaming formats that we have, which again might feed into making games more accessible if we start seeing the price walk away on upper end AAA games.
Yeah, that's it's interesting. Like you mentioned, you talked a lot about that, man. Like how the AAA games are kind of the really. I mean, if you think about it, they are the, I guess, luxury item in the gaming industry, right? And I do think they're like AA games. Like I think of like a Plague's Tale, right? That's not a AAA game, but it has that. In some ways, it has that AAA feel, I guess, visually. And I think that we'll see AA games kind of have those high production values, right? It's they may not be AAA in scope per se, but they could have some of those like production values, right? But but it's interesting. AAA, and I never thought of it like that till you brought up. It is kind of the luxury item of the gaming industry, right? It is. It's like with vehicles. You buy a car, right? You get the BMW 5 Series. They also make the BMW M5, right? Which is the high-end performance one, right? Not everybody, like you said, is entitled to that vehicle for economic reasons, obviously, right? And I forget, I don't know how much the cost of that is, difference, of that vehicle versus like just the regular 5 Series. But I've never actually thought of it like that, Game Logic, until you brought that up. But that goes back to kind of my initial point that gaming is not immune to the way other consumer products are tiered either, right? And we've and there used to be just one tier, and I mentioned our experiences 30 plus years ago. Fast forward now, we have these tiered options now, right? So there is something for everyone, and I think that's kind of also, I think, missing in the conversation, that people are so hyper focused on $70 games. It's like, wait a minute, it's not just $70. We have an abundance of opportunities, and you don't have to buy those $70. Wait for them to go on sale too, right? We have so many options, and to me, what's kind of frustrating is that gets lost in this focus on, oh my God, well, they're charging $70 for games now.
Yeah.
It's like they are, but guess what? As a consumer, you don't have to pay it. You can wait.
Well, what's really funny too is, we've talked about a ton of financial and economic factors, right? What's I think what's part of the dynamic too is the social dynamic, because what's really funny about the gaming industry, or the gaming consumer market, I think, is there are some social dynamics in it that are highly invigorated in comparison to movies and TV shows, right? Meaning, just like you mentioned, right? There's a handful of TV shows, and even on streaming, right? There's a handful of things that come out that you're like, I need to see that, like that, me having access to that and me being able to see that before it gets spoiled and being part of that conversation, that FOMO.
FOMO's
there's
real.
A handful of things.
I mean, Game Logic, you maybe had FOMO. You talking about PC stuff? and you sent me that picture of that. I know you sent it back, but that builds you. When I saw that, dude, I'm telling you, when I saw those RGBs, that's what really it was a thing of beauty. I'm like, I gotta have that FOMO, and I'm like, you know what? Like, I could wait for the 40 series, but I know there's still going to be a chip shortage, right? I don't think that's not going anywhere anytime soon, right? Then you got to contend with the bots, and anyhow, but and I was like, you know what? Here's an opportunity for me to get something that I know I want, because I want to, again, kind of a oh my God, I'm going back and forth with this guy, Luke himself. We're talking about, huh?
No, I see him.
Well, what my point was to him was like, when you have additional feature sets in a game that are exclusive, that aren't found in another game, technically those aren't the same games, right? In name and in content, yes, but they're not really the same games, right?
Yeah, and I think, and again, I think this again hangs very much so on the social factor I was bringing up as well. It seems strange that gamers don't understand or don't acknowledge that their tendencies and what they want to do and how they see things. No individual is the market, right? A lot of complaining about microtransactions, right? And so if you base your perception on what you think you see on Twitter, you would think everyone hates microtransactions. If you have ever sat on an investor's call for a gaming company, which is a public event that you can dial into and attend, right? You would understand that microtransactions work, right? Again, I go back to the Battlefield 2042 conversation, right? If you pay attention to Twitter, you would think everyone hates Battlefield 2042. And yes, I know that there's the petition out now, which is like the third highest petition on change.org right ever, right? However, that game was still one of the highest played games on Steam, right? That is a paid game. That's not a game that people have access to on Game Pass or some other subscription service. Yes, you have access to it via EA Play. I happen to think the EA Play market saturation is relatively low in comparison to a lot of other subscription services, but by and large, that's people paying for the game, right? The market is doing things that the game companies are responding to that don't equate to the social fervor that there is about a lot of things. And so, again, gaming kind of suffers, I think, from a lot of this large volume rhetoric about what gamers want and what gamers don't want, because there is a much higher degree of FOMO in that market, right, than there is in movies or television, right? Not a ton of complaining, I think, even for some of the, like, even I got to the point where like I didn't have to go see every Marvel movie like within the first 2 weeks of it releasing, right?
I mean, I haven't even seen Spider-Man.
Right, right.
Because honestly, I don't want to go to the movies and pay, whatever, because I want to go see an IMAX, right? So I don't want to pay whatever it is for that, and then the popcorn and the drink, and I want to watch it in the comfort of my own house with my Dolby Atmos surround system and my 65-inch CX OLED. That's how I want to experience it, right?
Yep.
So I'm willing to wait for that experience. Others aren't. Others, that FOMO kicks. I got to go see it. I got to get tickets for the new Batman, right?
Right, and I think a large part of the gaming consumer market that has that voice is that's where they are, right? A lot of the pushback on on the notion of a $7 game, a lot of that is built around I don't want to not be part of the conversation, right, about that game in the first weeks that it releases, right? I don't want to be part of that conversation 6 months down the road when it's on sale, right? And I'm like that, but that's not that's not a valid reason, right, for gaming companies to not charge. Gaming companies need to charge. Gaming companies need to do what they need to do to be viable going concerns, and that's going to drive them to make the decisions, the choices that they need to make.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's a great point. I mean, again, they're the business to make money, and if they can't make money, they're not going to be able to keep the doors open, right?
Yeah, and let's be true. It's because again, I see a lot of this pushback about prices, and it's built around this seeming perspective that if you're a mom and pop shop and you only service the surrounding 20 square miles, right, then you don't have to be worried a ton about making profit, right? But if you are a large corporation, the purpose of that corporation existing is to make money for its shareholders, right? And again, that's not an entirely malevolent force in the market, right? That corporation makes more money for its shareholders, therefore it can hire more people, therefore it can create a way of living for, right, so on and so forth, right? We're not all like losers and non-benefactors, right, of companies doing well, right? And so again, the point is not simply to do good, right, or do as good as you did last year, but the vector is always going to be to do increasingly better, right? And that's just the thing that has to be acknowledged. Again, there are governmental and economic systems where that's not a requirement, right? You can live in a communist economy, right, and you can maintain a price for a given good, right, that the party says that you have to pay or not to pay more than X, right? But again, we don't live in in that type of economy.
Yeah. No, we don't. We really don't. Yeah. There's actually some good conversation happening in the chat. Some interesting points being made.
Yeah, really good ones.
Yeah. So yeah, that's if Brian Light says milk those FOMOs. That's capitalism.
Yeah.
I mean, look, it happened to me, man. I went out and I got this PC, and it's like, and I was going back and forth. Remember, I was like, oh, I don't know, should I get it? How's this built? And I tell you what, that Valentine's Day sale helped.
Right. Yeah. I mean, as you and I talked about, right? It's like it's hard for it. Like I don't go to work to make the same amount of money for my company that we made last year. Right? That every time you make a certain amount, that sets the new bar. Right? And I don't. It's difficult for me, and I struggle with people who have the perspective that's not what companies do, right? Like I don't get it,
Yeah, no, yeah, but I think that's again, I think that is the I think part of it too, like I said, I don't think people realize how. I think part of it's just a lack of understanding too. People don't understand that record revenues isn't. There's more to that. Like we discussed. We talked about like profit margins, things like that. And that, like again, like I want to drive on the point that there's just more options available, right? Like right. Even like you don't like even if you even if you don't want to pay $70 for Ghost of Tsushima on PlayStation 5, right? Buy the PlayStation 4 version, right? You're still going to get your 4K 60. It's not native 4K, but whatever. You're not going to get the haptic feedback 3D audio. That's fine, right? If you want a more immersive experience, if you like those things are worth it, then have at it. Or if you want to wait, that $70 game is going to drop in price at some point. Go get it then. Play other games in the meantime.
Right.
And and we just I don't know. Anyhow, I see some slander about PC. We're not going to do any PC slander here today.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this argument in the chat is going on about because what PC gamers are willing to pay for versus what console gamers are willing to pay for, and it's.
I mean, PC games used to be $50 too. Then they went up to $60.
Yeah, but I mean, I see the.
Now they're not going up to 70 now. By the way.
Right. I mean, I see the points. That in the PC market, we're accustomed to different things. We're accustomed to things going on sale more quickly. We're accustomed to seeing. I mean, great Scott, like freaking Steam has a stinking sale like every 5 days. It seems like, and every publisher's library goes on sale like in rotation, like every 5 weeks. So, I get that and I understand it, and again that's fine. Is that a reason to play PC versus console? Maybe, right? I can say as I sit here with my Xbox Series S and PlayStation 5 packed up over there on the floor. But I don't. But again, they're different markets, and there should be an understanding and an expectation.
Wait, Game Lunch, are you getting rid of the PlayStation 5 and Series S?
Yeah. Yep.
What are you doing with? Are you trading them in, or are you selling them?
Selling them.
Did you sell them already?
I have not. No, I don't. I don't put them up on eBay too quick because I don't want to be. I feel like when I sell something on eBay, I have to follow through on due diligence on shipping it as quickly as possible, and I got some things.
Let me tell you, I had the worst time trying to sell a PlayStation 5 on eBay, and big shout out to J-Dub, who actually ended up buying the PlayStation 5 that I had. Because I was like, I just happened, and I went out. I was greedy. I was one of those scalpers. I sold the PlayStation 5 to help pay for, Christmas gift for the kids, and I happened to the GameStop by my house on Thanksgiving. They opened up. There was not a line. Think about it. This is crazy. They had like 10 PlayStation 5s. There was no line.
Wow.
And I got there like at 4:00. They opened at like 6, and there was like 2 people, like 3. It was me and 2 other people, 3 of us. And as we got closer to like the opening time, more people came, but like I was just shocked. And so I said, why the hell not? I'm just gonna go get it. And I was just selling on eBay. But eBay was a nightmare for me though. Like I had people like who were like trying to get like, I don't know. I got people just basically bullshitting that they were gonna buy it, But do you have the disc version or the digital version?
Yeah, I have the digital version.
All right, I may want to get that off your hands.
Okay, my man.
So yeah, that's why I was like, did you sell them yet? So, anyhow, that's FOMO, by the way. That's me saying, you know what? I want to have the option to be able to play in a different room instead of just unplugging it and moving the console myself, right?
Hey man, I owned two PlayStation 3s and 2 PlayStation 4s, so I get it. It was a sad day when I had to let my launch edition PlayStation 3 go with its rounded edges and its hardware-based backwards compatibility. It was a tough choice to make.
Yeah, that's tough. Yeah, but I just got another Series X, by the way. So that's
nice.
Yeah. Well, it's a long story. I have to tell you that offline, but anyhow. But no, you know what? Look, I think this was a great conversation, by the way. I hope people got something out of this outside of it's just bad, greedy devs, because I think there's some things about the industry people don't just take into consideration, right? Because I really don't think that there's like, I don't think there's excessive price gouging here in the gaming industry either. I have seen when they've tried it, when companies have been a little egregious with things, there's definitely been pushback where, they've kind of, turned the table a little bit, but I don't think there's anything egregious here. And I think if there was, the market wouldn't support it either. We wouldn't be seeing Sony could double down on $70 games. EA wouldn't be selling, or Activision wouldn't be selling $70 games on next gen consoles. Like, they just wouldn't do it.
Right. I mean, I think if there was real malevolence at play, like, quite easily, gaming companies could have raised prices on games during the pandemic.
Absolutely.
Very easily.
Yeah.
And they made good money then, but they could have made money hand over fist, right?
They could have taken advantage of the situation.
Yeah, because what are you going to do? You ain't going out to the movies.
Right? Exactly. Yeah, you're not going out to the movies. You're not going out to restaurants,
Right. But they didn't. The $10 price bump was in there. It was tightly coupled to a generational bump, right? It had a rationale to it. A rationale around which you could apply your own rationale and, again, make choices as an adult, right? You didn't have to do those things. But again, when gas goes into scarcity, right, the gas station across the street charges more money, right, than the gas station going the other way that doesn't have an exit ramp right by it, right? That's a little bit more malevolent, right? And it gets straight up to price gouging, when it's really over the top, like you said. Like, that's not what we're seeing going on in the game industry.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think we're seeing that. I'm sorry, I'm typing here. And there's, I just typed to someone about the echo chip. The funny thing is, a lot of what you see, like on, I don't know, you're not on Twitter getting any more Game Logic. A lot of what people see on Twitter isn't necessarily reflective of the entire industry or the entire consumer base, right? Twitter is very much an echo chamber of a very small group of individuals, and I'm always cognizant of that, because it doesn't really give you the full picture, or I think even a really good picture into how consumers really think about things. Like someone in the live chat said, they're trying to sell Final Fantasy VII Remake on Steam for $70. They were roasted for that, but that was kind of the echo chamber roasting them, right? And I don't know how well it's doing on Steam, but again, if somebody wants to play that game and pay $70 for it, they're absolutely going to do it. There is precedent. There is precedent to. There is precedent to, price increases on PC too. They went from 50 to 60, and 60 was sustainable. There is that precedent for $10 increases being sustainable. And again, if it's not, the market's going to push back, and then they're going to change pricing. But I just don't see that happen.
Yeah, and yes, we've commented. There are tons of game sales on Steam, right? But there's also tons of games that I go and look at on Steam, and I'm like, this thing's been out for 2 years, and yet it's still full price. Like, what the heck is that, right? So, it's not
Nintendo.
Just because it's PC, it's not necessarily immune to that. It's still case by case, and we can talk about majorities and whatever. I mean, Twitter is very similar to kind of the streaming community, where I constantly slag the streaming community because they play bad games, right? They play mid and mediocre games, and you go on Twitch and yet those are the games that are trending, right? It's and the games that are trending on something like Twitch Strike are not in harmony or are not synergistic with game sales, right? Or Metacritic scores, right? They're doing their own thing, and that's why I say you can't use Twitch as a barometer of what's good in games, right? Because those things chart significantly differently. And by the same token, right, what kind of trends as wailing and gnashing of teeth on Twitter can quite frequently trend and chart differently than sales numbers are actually occurring and commerciality is actually occurring, right? Again, I go back to Battlefield 2042 and some other games. So as you mentioned, right, there's a lot of echo chamber, there's a lot of FOMO, and I feel like I always recommend that people actually, hit the books and go do the research and read the historical texts and kind of understand, and again, go look at the data, right? And don't make the data serve your already pre-prescribed narrative, right? But actually follow the data and assess it, and then make your narrative around, you know, the math that you actually see and can understand.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean that's a great point. You know, game logic. You know, people should do their homework, more or less. You know, and that's that's kind of the frustration I've had with social media and even YouTube, where you know it's all hot takes and you know nonsensical statements about things that people really just don't have any real insight into, right? And a lot of it is that need to, have that confirmation bias happen, right? Which I think is unfortunate because, I don't know. I just think that's unfortunate. That's probably my personality. I've always tried to, if I don't understand something, I always try to ask people who are the subject matter experts in a particular field or topic, because I want to know. Like, I don't want to be out there just, making these wild guess. That doesn't sit well with me personally, but that's just me. That's a me problem, which is why I was going to you. But remember, this is why I was going back and forth with you about like the PC parts I was looking at, right? Right. I'm not I'm not, I know what a 37 GPU is, right? But in terms of like price per performance and, how it, is it worth getting that or a 3080? Like those are things that like you probably have better, insight into that than I do. So that's why I was asking you all those questions, especially about, I was asking about Intel versus AMD, the CPUs. So,
right.
Anyhow, I'm ranting at this point. But
I was distracted by it. Look, Jeff B. Gaming, I've agreed with a lot of the things that you said in the chat, but PC games for the most part aren't high production value apart from the same multiplex consoles get. That's a hard fork I'm gonna have to take with that opinion there.
What do you think about that opinion though? Like, what are your thoughts? I'm just curious.
Well, again, I mean, I'll agree that PC gaming suffers from a lot of just product, right? Again, 12,000 games released on Steam last year, but I don't look at the entirety of that 12,000 games as like the core product of the PC gaming industry. I look at the upper crust, and again, the reason I'm getting rid of my consoles is because I have to admit, as I look back over the last few years, like any gaming experience that I've ever had is always at its highest level on PC. And that's and you can get into an argument and fight with me about whether or not it's better on a platform or not. I don't think that's really relevant. At the end of the day, a large part of it is the fact that I'm just able to tailor and customize my experience to my own liking, vastly to a greater level of fungibility than I can on console. I've been building PCs for over 20 years, and one of the reasons, as you and I have been going back and forth, I went with build rather than buy is, I look back at the builds and stuff that I have, and I have to, I just had to come down and admit that as much of a PETA as it quite often is, my best PC units have always been the ones that I've built, right, versus the ones that I've store bought. So, and that in and of itself just enhances that gaming experience. That PlayStation 5 or that Xbox, it's the same, white piece of plastic and, industrial square blocky black or white design that everybody else has. And so there's something, I joke, but HP's marketing slogan, the PC is personal again, is something that definitely rings true with me. So no, I don't agree with the take that that PC games are, I guess, what did Jeff B. Gaming say? Or PC games are niche to the casual console gamer. RTS games, indie sprite games, multiplayer arena like League of Legends games. What are niche? I mean, I don't disagree with you that there are games that play on PC that just don't play on console. Like I would never play an RTS or a strategy game on a console. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't either. Yeah.
To each their own, man. I love people who love games and love playing them on whatever they play them on. So I just want, I'm happy when people make choices.
I still think PC is the best place to play games. That's just my opinion. I mean, there's something to. I mean, look, I mean, PC is. When I got back into PC, and then we'll go ahead and wrap this up. But when I got back into PC, when I picked up, because I actually PC game for quite a bit in the '90s, and then the consoles came, and then I think I probably really left it was like 90s through probably PlayStation 2 is probably when I stopped playing PC. Like, just completely stopped, and then never went back to it. That's not true. I was playing a little bit of Unreal Championship in like 2002. So, okay. So early 2000s, I left, and then just didn't look back. And then when I went back and I got the build that I have now, it just made me like this. I don't know how to describe it, but it not that I didn't like gaming before, but it just really I was really excited for gaming again, if that makes sense. Not that I wasn't, but there was just something about gaming on PC and having the options in terms of how I wanted to experience a game, and I love that, and knowing that I was getting,
a high fidelity experience.
That's exactly the word I was looking for. Because it's funny, people will be like, "Oh, you don't have 4K." I'm like, "Yeah, I have 1440p, but I'm also playing at high and ultra high settings." So thank you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, look. I mean, my last poker chip in this thing is, you can extract a high fidelity experience. I feel like out of PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, but I feel like there's lots of hurdles to jump over, right? To get the right thing, to put it all together, and to make it all compatible. Whereas I feel like on the PC, like I feel like I don't even. And again, maybe that's just a matter of how long I've been, a consumer in that market, and again building my own PCs and stuff like. I do 120 hertz over HDMI, 120 frames over HDMI. right or granted, I also use I don't have these impediments and these barriers where I got to go buy an HDMI 2.1 TV, and I got to make sure it's HDMI 2.1, and I got to make sure it's got variable refresh rate, and I got to make sure that all these things, and
by the way,
I'll say that.
But by the way, not all TVs are built the same with HDMI 2.1. Right. I mean, I learned that with the Vizio, the Quantum P that I got. It had issues with the handshake between the Series X and the TV.
Even if you just talk about 4K, right? I wrote a blog post, back in the Xbox One era, right, about even 4K gaming, and I'm like, the different nested menus that all the settings are in to get 4K to work correctly between a console and a TV, where there's menus on the TV. There's multiple different menus on the TV, and then there's multiple different menus on the console, and you got to make sure that all those are right and in sync to actually get the 4K HDR picture. And I'm like, on a PC, I just plug the cable in. And yes, maybe there are some settings I got to go hit, but I don't know. It seems like I'm able to traverse them a lot easier and put them together than I can on console. But like I said, to each his own. No, like, console gaming is great. I'm not slagging it by any means. I've spent 40 plus years in that environment, and it's been great. Just taking a little break for a little bit.
No, I hear you, man. All right, Game Logic. Well, let's go. We're gonna wrap up the podcast here, but I think I want to give a big shout out to everyone here in the live chat. I really appreciate it. Hopefully some of you got some information out of this. I hope. But anyhow, if you're new to the channel, please subscribe, hit the bell notification so you're alerted when we go live. Please hit that like button if you haven't done so already. And again, really appreciate everyone hanging out with us this evening. Some good banter there in the live chat. So, and then we'll be back. Our regular BRAP will be back on Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern time, and this Wednesday coming up 9 p.m. Eastern time. So thank you again. And Game Logic, man, always a pleasure having you on, man, and just always great conversation, man. I really appreciate your time as always, man.
Thanks, man. It's good. It's always great exploring these topics with you. And your chat, even though there's a little more shoulder bristling this time than last time, but it was still much more even keel than some of the console warring that we've seen on previous episodes.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So, all right, everyone, have a great rest of the weekend. Enjoy gaming because that's what it's all about, just having fun. So we'll catch you next time. We'll be back next Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern Time.